All right, then. It seems that we are ready to go. So the purpose of this panel, which in past years has been called Grill the Committee, but is in recent years we've called it Committee Fireside Chat. It's a lower stakes version, and is for you to ask questions, anything about C++, especially about standardization, because we have a panel of esteemed chairs of various groups of the Standards Committee. And so please use the mics and come up to the mics. There should be another mic over here. I can't quite see it, so perhaps we can move it closer in range. Thank you. And let me give you, as you're thinking about your first questions to ask, let me give you a short introduction. So first of all, I'm Herb Sutter. I'm the chairman of WG21, the C++ Standards Committee, and I am the moderator, not a panelist, so I am not going to answer any questions. My job, this is by construction, my job is to direct the questions to our panelists. To my left is Bjarna Johansson, whom you've seen twice already today and might have heard of before. He is also the original chair of the Evolution Working Group, the Language Evolution Working Group in the Standards Committee. We have then Lisa Lippincott, and you'll see her on the screen as well, from Tanium, who's also the chair of the Numerics Group. Gabrielle Dosreis, who is the chair of the UB Group. And it's undefined whether UB means undefined or unspecified behavior, but it covers both of them. So if you're not sure what isn't well defined in C++, he can answer those questions. Probably. David Stone is currently the vice chair of the Evolution Working Group, the one that Bjarna founded. So David is the vice chair. And before that, it's not shown on the screen, but you also chaired the Modules Study Group. So you were responsible for shepherding and the organization of landing a major feature in the standard. So thank you for that. Mike Wong chairs just about everything. So he chairs SG14, which is the low latency / gaming / several other things related to something in that area. You chair AI, I should have mentioned that on the screen. And you currently are chair transactional memory as well. And then Inbal is the national body chair for Israel and also organizes one of our sister conferences, another conference in Israel, Core C++, which just happened very recently. And I think was the first in-person C++ conference I know of, so we're number two. We're number two. And so thank you for that, and we're happy to have you here. And you're currently chairing the SG8, I think it is, for the Ranges extension. Yeah. 9 for Ranges. Thank you. So here are our panelists. Zero-based, yeah. So who would like to ask the first question of our panelists? Please come forward to the mics and don't be shy. Also, if one of the volunteers, if this is, oh no, this isn't live because it's the end of the day and it's very late in Europe. So this will be, we don't have live questions from the internet this time for these late sessions. But please go ahead.
Hi, nice to meet you all. Big fan of your work. So what's some good advice for aspiring library writers who might want to someday join the committee?
Excellent question to start. Who would like to take that one? Lisa?
Show up. Really, that seems to be all it takes.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of intimidated by their first committee meeting, but I don't think you have to be. Like, you write your paper, you can submit it. Just make sure that people have reviewed it and that it's something reasonable if you're coming with a proposal. But maybe an even better idea would be to just show up the first time, learn how things go, talk to people, and kind of float your idea informally. That kind of helps lower the stakes for you a little bit in the sense of you've shown it to some people, you know who the people are. But yeah, kind of echoing Lisa, you show up and help out.
Bjarna.
It might actually be an idea to read a few papers and track a little bit of history of what have happened before. You type WG21 into your browser and you find more papers that you could possibly want about the standardization. But look at something that looks familiar or relevant or interesting. Read a couple of those so that you don't come with a totally strange view of what the committee can and cannot do.
Thank you. I am not seeing anyone at the mics. Please don't be shy.
Well, you know what? I'm going to add
go ahead,
one
Michael.
more piece to that. I think that a lot of people have these kinds of trepidations about joining a committee and seeing the people up there. And I did too. And honestly, for the first couple of years, I said very little. All I did was I tried to do my homework, read their books, read their papers, try to come as prepared as I can. In my case, I was a little different. I was compelled by my company to come. I had to show up. It was my job. But even then, I was really trying to be as prepared as I could be. And at the end of the day, I still said a lot of dumb things. I still do. But this group, this crowd is pretty easy on me. I thought, you know, they actually helped me, I think, to grow and to learn. And you know, when I say dumb things, they gently, you know, inform me. And it wasn't harsh at all. So I think there's a lot of ways to go there, you know, in terms of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi there. What's the latest with networking?
Networking. Do you read Reddit by any chance?
I know some of the things that have happened the last few weeks, but I just thought I'd get the very latest.
All right. Who would like to start off with networking?
I think she knows more than I do about it now.
Inbal, please.
Sure, I do, but
I'll fill in whatever.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think networking is a very interesting use case of a feature that is almost ready, but also have just a few more discussions that needs to be done. And the security issue is one of those things. So I think that's close, but we still need to have a bit more there. And of course, the Azio model and sender receivers is a thing that we discuss quite often. So you know, I hope we'll get there.
Okay. Now the opposite side. No, just kidding. Bjarna and I often talk about what it takes to get a big feature through. And it's like giving birth. Sometimes not without convulsions. And networking is a classic example. It's been there since, 2005, I think was like maybe around then, not precisely, based on the Azio model. It became a TS, and along the way, for various reasons, there was not enough attention paid to it to get it through the committee. The author is very far away, blah, blah, blah. We were very busy with 11, 14, 17. And now that it's getting really serious, and it is, there are now potentially better models coming about. One of which Ingbao mentioned, some people like to layer security on top of it. So the question to you, is do you want networking always with security or sometimes without? There's also this new thing called sender-receiver model, which we would have to redo some part of networking to be based on that. And that's going to take time, which is exactly what Ingbao is saying. So it doesn't look like networking is going to make 23 at this point. That's personally for me, that's kind of sad. I want networking as, and we'll have to see what happens for 26 if that doesn't happen. So not a terribly bad story, but that's how it is. Yeah.
Further comments, Bjarna?
I'm sad it's not there. And the interesting thing, of course, it's been in heavy-duty industrial use for more than a decade. So whatever we do to it, it will not go away and will not change dramatically because it has become a de facto standard. And we are in the situation where something solid didn't become standard, and now people come with all kinds of bright new ideas that may or may not actually improve it, but it will definitely delay it for another 5 years. And this is the kind of stuff that is sad, and we should think hard about how to avoid this happening again. And my favorite theory is that TSs very often just drag out time because it is not well defined what the outcome of a TS should be. What is the question asked by a TS, or before that a TM? And if you can't answer the question, that is, which question is being asked, you should not ask for a TS.
Now, David.
And just to kind of clarify a few things that were said, a TS, for those who aren't familiar, is short for like technical specification. And it's a way where we can publish something with a little bit more formality than just a proposal, like a more official document, but not quite merged into the standard yet, to kind of give it time for people in the industry to see it, hopefully encourage implementers to adopt it, because we're saying this is a pretty stable target, but we still expect some amount of changes to come in the future, to kind of give a future a little bit of time to mature before we merge it into the final standard.
So one follow-up, a little challenging follow-up maybe. Bjarne, you said this morning that it's good for the features to work together, right? It's for there to be for them to play together. So yeah, it's a drag that Azio is standard and so widely used, but on the other hand, is it worth paying the price to have it exploit executors or sender receiver, or use the latest thinking and have those features work together?
So what you just asked is, I think, one of the things that we're extensively discuss, and this is one of the hardest parts, I think, of trying to look into the future and make sure that we don't make too much of a big mistake. So yeah, that's one of the issues.
Very good. Next question, please. Ben, I know you.
Hello. So C++20 is huge, right? So huge, in fact, that it seems to be overshadowing 23. And I believe we're like 6 months away from feature freeze on 23 or so. So what is, like, I've seen relatively little about 23. What's exciting about C++23?
Excellent question. So, Sup. Perhaps, do I see a hand in the middle? Okay, Bjarne, go first, please.
23 wasn't supposed to be exciting. The way I think about it, and I'm not alone, but it's not the only way of thinking about it, is that when you have a massive new thing, there will be bits and pieces that you didn't get quite right. There are bits and pieces that you didn't get in because you had a feature freeze. And I really liked the fact that C++14 was a relatively minor release that basically completed 11, which was a major improvement. And my view from well before 20 was that 23 was a necessary minor improvement of 20. And there are things we know we didn't get right with 20 because we didn't have time. I would like to see standard library modules, a module presented as, as the standard library presented as a module, library support for coroutines. And there was a third thing we voted that was what we were going to go to do. And we might actually still make it, but we are not going to get the exciting things that we hope we will be able to work on. Pattern matching was a good example, and I'd also hoped for networking for 23. That was not an unreasonable thing to dream about, even though probably it might very well not happen now. But if you're looking for excitement, 23 is not the first place to look.
Gabi, please.
I have to say that although 14 was billed as bug fix, expanded context expr, generic lambdas, init capture, the return type deduction, they were all amazing features of 14.
I never called it a bug fix.
Sorry, that was my words.
Yeah, it is true that before going into the Prague meeting, the last face-to-face meeting we had, the committee, February 2020, some of us were already thinking that 23 was going to be a minor release compared to 20. And we even adopted some kind of roadmap at the meeting. And if you look at the roadmap, it looked like, a minor release compared to 20. The thing that we did not anticipate was that we would be kind of locked at home for at least 2 years. And I don't know how long the committee has been around, since 90. And since 90, we have debugged that process of working face-to-face, and we have optimized it quite well. But the thing we haven't worked on, and what's completely new to us, was how to work effectively moving the standard forward while we're all locked in a basement or somewhere. We do not have this face-to-face, in-person interactions that actually allow us to solve or unlock logjams. So that has definitely slowed down progress. One thing that was kind of optimistic about going into Prague was that, okay, we are going to have contract, which was something that I'm very passionate about. I think will bring increased safety. It was kind of theme for me for the C++ community. So, okay, we'll work on this for C++ 2023. But based on the lockdown and how we have to work, I have not been able at all to dedicate the amount of time necessary to move it forward, while also working on finishing modules, done a library, and a bunch of other stuff. So it was just a conjunction of circumstances that made C++ 23 less spectacular than 20, but that was expected somehow.
So before we take the next question, let me inject a follow-up question for the panel. So as all of you are very well aware, the lockdown that happened about 5 weeks after we finished C++ 20 and got back home just to be working from our basements for at least a couple of years. It'll be 2.5 years if we succeed in meeting in July between meetings. We're hoping to meet in July. We have so far had something like 200 Zoom meetings for subgroups. We have not stopped. What has it felt like to you to participate in, and none of you have, I hope, gone to all 200, but what has that experience been like for you to do our best working virtually and in such high volume?
For me, that's been a lot more challenging, I think, because it's a lot harder to find a time that works for everyone when you have a global group of people working on it. So we try to schedule things at a bunch of different times, which also means that things are broken up more. For me, it was a lot easier to just set aside a week where I'm going somewhere and some preparation time ahead of time to read everything and kind of get in that mode of thinking about standardizing things. And it's definitely taken some adaptation to be able to work effectively when it's, an hour here, an hour there, that sort of thing.
So I think that you'll find the answer is that people are divided between the two, the ones that really love this working from home status on the Azio, and the ones that find it hard. But I think the real thing is that each have ups and downs. So on the one hand, we lose the contacts, and we don't have we don't get to look at all of the features together in a very focused way. But I think there's also upsides that we actually have more time to process and to find out bugs and problems. So I think there's also some upsides to this. So,
could I direct a question at Michael specifically? Because even before the pandemic, some subgroups had been meeting heavily, regularly, virtually for years, and yours were several of them, Michael. How had that worked for you? And then next, after that, I'd like to go to Gabi.
So before, we were on this 3-month time constraint. And even though my group was always online and everyone was accustomed to it, you just didn't have enough time. You just basically, you got to get papers out, you got to review them so that when you come here, you got to get them ready. So that's what I found. In the pandemic era, what we did was now we had a lot more time. We had time to really go through, for instance, in machine learning, we're going through graph theory, we're going through differential calculus and stats, one a month, because these topics really requires deep diving. Now, here's the thing that I've observed. I probably attended more of these online meetings because I have this capability at home where I attend multiple meetings, not totally paying full attention. And this is, I'll be the first one out to admit, if I'm not chairing, I may not be paying full attention because I have 2 other meetings going on. Sometimes 3. I've got like 4 computers surrounding me, okay? It's like the Starship Enterprise, So our observation is that they have done a heroic job of getting people staying involved, keeping things moving. But the thing is that we are seeing is because on the one hand, you're now having more people being able to get involved without having to pay to travel. On the other hand, the online meetings can really only deal with mostly smallish, medium-sized features. The task of dealing with integrating a very large feature is very difficult to do online. This is reflective of the fact that we probably don't have as many large features done. And most of them are now kind of deferred, and you're probably going to see that. So we like the fact that people are still pushing this forward, but it's not a mode that's going to be easily conducive if you're trying to do something big, I think.
And now you see why I directed that question to Michael. Gabi, please.
Yeah, to give a concrete example to that I've lived is contract, for example. It's a very complicated, big feature. And sometimes having an in-person meeting means you, Herb, get to lock a bunch of people who don't agree in a room, set in a timer, say, in 2 hours, we are going to open a door and you better finish having an agreement, right? And that works. I've seen it work many times. And that's much harder to do with the online meetings because people are in different time zones. I'm on the West Coast and people in Central Europe are like 9 or 10 hours away, and it is really, really hard. And in addition to that, I think, Michael, you probably people who have kids at home, I have to be a remote teaching assistant for the kids while also attending W21 meetings. And then they have a bunch of study group meetings almost at the same time. So it's extremely hard to follow and dedicate time. And in addition to that, your employers is still expecting you to be as productive.
Yes. Let's take one more with Bjarna, and then we'll take the next question over here. And then I think you were first. Is it okay if he makes a comment on that? Okay, go ahead, Bjarna, and then we'll take the comment.
So I'm rather negative about the effect of Zoom meetings to deal with the pandemic. The first observation is that WG21 is not the only organization that tries to keep relevant by adding meetings. So does our employers, so does just about everything. So does conferences, user group meetings and such. So my schedule has been fractured, and it's very hard to stay focused because you can't be there at all the meetings because they clash with each other. And meetings tend to be run by people who are there constantly. And that means there's different people from when you are actually at a meeting. In particular, there is a higher proportion of people who are focused on a single issue or a single proposal. And those of us who are trying to keep abreast of the language as a whole are at a grave disadvantage, because it is not uncommon that there's 6 or 7 meetings in a week, and that to keep an overview, you really ought to be in 4. And the correct and the actual answer then, with all the constraints that are in place, is that sometimes I didn't turn up at any of them. There's also work that are well suited to be done with a group of people focused on a single issue with an agenda. Handling issues that can be handled one after another. But if you're looking at the breadth of the language, if you're looking at feature interaction, if you're looking at how language features affects library facilities, how library facilities touch other libraries and language issues, it becomes very, very hard. And then the final thing is that when I have to be part of several organizations, say teaching at Columbia, working for my employer, and standards committees in the plural, I never get my cache loaded up and hot for a meeting, 2 or 3 meetings a week. I come in more or less cold because I'm coming right out of a meeting on something else. The meetings that we have face-to-face are much better at you are thinking about the language as a whole, talking to people. If you can't be at the meeting because we're running 7 ways in parallel, at least you can talk to the people over dinner or over a beer afterwards. That doesn't happen. In theory, I guess it could happen, but it doesn't. And so I worry about the way things are going now, even when they're going well. The design issues, the big topic issues where we like to be face-to-face and use a whiteboard and things like that are not done very well at an agenda with a fixed set of people. Most of the time on the Zoom, most people are not visible. You can't see other people's reactions to what is being said in the room. And I certainly at a standards meeting spend a lot of time watching the body language of other people in the room, calibrating what they seem to be thinking. And after several meetings, I know what they are like, I know how they react, and I get much more information than I get from the formal presentation. So I'm somewhat negative about this. It's a very, very hard job to drive a standard forward during a pandemic.
I just want to add that it definitely increases the level of FOMO. So.
Okay, so I'm going to agree with almost everything I've heard. It's certainly for the evolution.
By the way, can you introduce yourself since you know a little bit about this?
Sorry. I'm Jeff Garland. I'm the sub-chair of the Library Working Group, which sits behind Inbal's group, the Evolution group. And so we're really the last phase for all library features. We review the wording, make sure it's correct, and are the final arbiter of saying, yes, it's ready to go before it goes to plenary for a final vote. So library, like the other groups, has had to adjust to the pandemic. And I think in our case, maybe it's a little bit easier because, like Bjarna said, we have a focused agenda, a paper that's written with an author, and we're trying to make sure that the wording implements the design. And that is really our single focus. Still, having said that, it's very difficult for large papers. And so it is clear that C++23 is going to be a lot of smaller features, but they're going to be good features. These are going to be things that you wanted C++ to do. And if I think there's one trajectory for me anyway over the last decade, it's sort of 1,000 small features actually adding into something that's more than the sum of the parts, as it were. And it's become such more a pleasure to program in C++ in certain ways that it never was in the past. So you can come to my talk on Friday. So I'll plug the talk. I'll tell you what's going to be coming mostly and what I think is going to be coming in library. But if you're not excited about stack trace, or you're not excited about better ranges, better formatting, well, you should be excited. Those are tools that you can use as a professional programmer every single day. I know our team does, and we want to see those things in the standard. So there's some really good stuff that's coming. A lot of that, by the way, was in the pipeline and didn't make it into 20 because we were behind the curve. There was so much content in 20. So maybe it's a cleanup release, but maybe that's a good thing.
Thank you. Please, thank you for waiting.
Yeah, kind of a step back to networking a little bit. Totally an uninformed opinion. I don't necessarily understand all of the decisions of why things have been made. And I actually, multiple points, I kind of want to make those and then let you kind of answer all of them or ignore whichever ones you want. First of all, I like incremental baby steps. I don't think everything has to be a grand release of big features. And I don't want to necessarily have the C++ library shove a framework on me of I have to do networking this way using this one model which is meant for a certain type of networking. I want to work with individual sockets through C++ and do more of low-level componentized mechanisms. I would suggest that potentially working at the network TS from multiple steps, do sockets, do a little bit of infrastructure on top of that, and then maybe an Azio type of infrastructure. I don't want to have the library do frameworks so that I have to be locked into because I don't necessarily always want to use those.
Reactions?
It wasn't a question there, so I don't know.
Well, it was more of a statement, and I'm just looking to see if those points had been addressed.
So let me
yes
try
or no
to
or
distill
not.
a question out of it, perhaps. And if this doesn't match, go ahead and give the comment you were going to give. But I think it's about componentization and layering. Can we break it up and do layers or pieces or components?
Yeah, so I think the point that you raise is an important one. So like in the committee, one of the many sayings we have is don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Like don't wait for a perfect feature maybe someday when you have something good now that can help people right now. But at the same time, like the flip side of that is you want to make sure that the features that we're adding in, those incremental steps are working toward the right goal. And sometimes when all you have is a view of the current goal, like or the current steps, you don't necessarily know if that's where we're going. So like not anything, I guess, specific to networking, I guess just kind of the general principle.
But you guys are looking at the Azio model now, which may already be obsolete, or other alternate options that may not be where it's at 6 years from now when eventually a big release comes around. They may be obsolete by the time it's done.
I agree with a lot of things you said, Chris, in that the debate in design has always been like this. Yes, Azio is a kind of a grand old model, so therefore it's well-baked, versus something else that's sender-receiver, which some people might view as not as well-baked. The design is always going to be debated about, do we add security now, or is it too late to add it later on? So yeah, I know, this is always
if you have a good layer
tension
model,
we're
that
under.
you can slip that in the middle, and it's transparent.
And then we're also thinking, how big is that interface going to be? Does it mean that, adding that security now makes the interface really big and not something, so yeah, absolutely. We are definitely thinking about some of these good points you made, yeah.
Pardon me to slide in a question because he's talking about security. Inbal has already mentioned security. So the two things that LEWG has asked the networking proposals to work on is look at sender receiver, look at security. Let me rephrase the security question in a way and get your reactions to it. One way to phrase the question that I've heard phrased by the chairs and by the participants is, in 2021 or 2 or 3, like now in our modern era, is it acceptable to ship a standard library that does not work with HTTPS? Like with the threat models in our environment and in our industries, with all the vulnerabilities and exploits and attacks that have been happening, is that something that we could actually do and call a good product? That's one way it's phrased. And I'm not saying which way the answer is. I'm trying to phrase the question in a provocative way.
Oh, okay. I'm going to take on that. But before that, I think there is a general comment about framework. Should the committee try to come up with framework that they push on C++ developers? I think we have to be a little bit pragmatic and also have a sense of design architecture in mind. The STL, the Standard Template Library, when it came in 1992, was completely new, revolutionary, and it is a framework. It surprised a lot of people, I think even including Bjarne, but we've got to understand it, and our way of thinking about how we program with the standard library has completely changed because it was a coherent, well thought out framework. It changed how we work. So I will not go as far as to say, oh, this is a framework, so we shouldn't go there. We should just give people some form of lower level stuff and give them some kind of IKEA instructions and let them build this stuff. I would not recommend that, but we need to be kind of careful. Now, on the question of security, it's a tough one. Like, I get it when people say, "Oh, do we really want to send a message that people C++ is encouraging developers by default to do unsecure network?" Of course, nobody wants that. But the flip side of it is that if you take on the notion that you're going to ship something in the space of security, you have to be very reactive, way faster than the 3 years that we update the standard formally. It means that the standard library implementers have to have a way of reacting very quickly, even if that means they will have to violate the standard because they need to come up with mitigations or new solutions and not wait for WGN1 to make up its mind. So it's a tough question for the committee. Maybe one way out of it is to have some kind of layering of abstractions that allow implementers to inject the necessary security that is needed, but also providing the standard ways of guaranteeing API and so forth. And I think that is hard and it requires thought. And I don't know what the perfect answer is, but I think this is a tough one.
Yeah. Anyone else want to weigh in? Bjarne? Or Lisa, go first.
I will say I haven't had a lot of interaction with the networking stuff, but what little I have had did run hard into the problem of trying to make it easier to do the right thing than to do the wrong thing, because there are just so many wrong things in networking that can be done so easily. And trying to find a design that, maybe you need to do insecure networking, maybe you need to do things that are going to, walk across type safety boundaries in some places, but trying to find a way to make the right thing the easy thing is a really hard design problem in this space.
Let me, for a second, take the language designer hat off and take my day job developer hat on. One of the points of a standard is to standardize existing practice. Azio and the TM and networking in general has been the standard in huge chunks of industry for about 15 years. And whatever we do, it's going to be there. So the question is, should it be well defined so that it's the same everywhere? The other thing is that security is very interesting, but not everybody interacts with everybody on Earth. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of critical networking that goes on inside multiple levels of security. And in there, performance matters dramatically. So if security was built in and cost 10%, it would not be used for those applications that doesn't touch end users. And we have to remember that there's many different domains, and these arguments, I'm sure, will be weighed, is being weighed. I presented just one story about it. I happen to also like the sender-receiver model. Maybe you need both. I am not sure. I'm not in that committee. It's one of these places where I should have been, but for pandemic or other reasons, I haven't been there also. About frameworks, I'd like to point out that you can build incrementally and grow incrementally if you have a reasonably good idea of where you're going. Otherwise, you will get into a situation where different people from different backgrounds, with different design traditions, with different design techniques, implementation techniques, constraints, will build individual parts that will not work together. We were heading into that problem for the 98 standard before the STL arrived. And you can still see signs of what happens when you have no firm idea of where you're going. Look at bit set, look at string. It is really important, if you want to do incremental design, rely on feedback, which is the ideal way of doing it, that you actually have a general idea of where you're going.
Thank you. A new question, please.
Yeah, to context switch again, back one conversation to the committee process. So when CppCon went online, it kept the same week-long model where everyone is able to get a hot cache and spend a whole week in it, even though it was a problematic time zone for a lot of people worldwide and all of that. Was that process ever considered for committee meetings? And if so, why didn't you go with that?
I'm not going to answer WG21 stuff, but with my CppCon organizer hat on, we didn't keep the same model. So the days were about half as long.
Yes, true.
And
but
so there were adjustments made.
Right. There were definitely adjustments, there had to be, but it was a very similar model. It was not as different as the 1 hour here and there throughout the entire year kind of model that the committee went into.
Yeah, for CppCon, it was because we had already learned that people just can't Zoom for an 8-hour day. Like you just can't. That may segue into the WG21 answer, which I will not answer, and I will let you answer. Why not full day Zoom meetings for WG21?
I will mention one thing. WG21 meetings are not 8-hour days. How about 16 for starters for people who don't have key roles and have to work even harder?
It's true.
So the answer is that we actually did try that not long ago. We just had a super session of LEWG, and I think that actually worked quite well. But you have to take under consideration that Zoom meetings are harder to get people, to maintain focus for a long time, and it's harder. But from my experience, at least, I think it worked well. But we also need to take under consideration that this is a different platform. So that's...
I wish we had. Is anybody here attended CORE in July? No. Yes? No? Okay, so I'll proxy them. Pretend I'm not me, because I didn't attend it either, but the CORE Language Working Group did, in the place of our July meeting, did actually have in 2020, had an entire week meeting. And they said they would never do it again.
So, yeah, I have to say, I find all these models flawed. Whether it's like a chunk, couple of hours, full day, they're all flawed. And I'm involved enough in many other kinds of committees and consortiums that I have tried them all. I've seen them all. Where do I even begin, right? I mean, the full day meeting, part of the problem is you still have your regular job going on, okay? it's just basically going to be interrupted constantly. The piecemeal meetings of an hour here, an hour there, an hour there, you can't solve big problems. Okay. Then the time, you might be able to serve the time zone thing reasonably well by moving it around, but it's also got its flaws. So none of these really work, in my opinion, really work well in terms of this remote thing. It works just as a Band-Aid to some degree to keep the structure going, but it is not a permanent solution, unfortunately, from my point of view.
And even the model we had before also isn't a perfect solution of needing people to fly or drive or whatever to a specific location in the world. Like that also has its flaws. Like everything we do has some sort of trade-off. But I liked what Gabi had said earlier, that with the way we were doing things before, of meeting for a week long, we had already spent a lot of time doing that. So we had kind of optimized the process and gotten used to it. Whereas this was kind of a new process. So anything we did that was new is going to have some amount of like difficulties or kinks that we have to work out.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that those of us who has had a standards meeting in our hometown, almost all of us has decided to move to the hotel so that we are there full time. Otherwise, we lose out too much. We are too ineffective, too interrupted. Most that has had the meeting so that they could have gone home have decided not to.
Yeah, like I live in Broomfield, Colorado, and I'm staying at the hotel for this conference.
For those who are not local, Broomfield is next door.
It's about an hour in the morning and about 45 minutes at night.
So commute distance.
Yeah, it's close enough to where I could have commuted. It would have been, a little annoying, I guess. But I felt like I would have lost out a bit on just kind of how easy it is to hang out with people at night and talk to them and kind of work through something that wasn't necessarily scheduled.
And these days, again, are shorter, as Bjarna said, than WG21 meeting days.
Yes.
Please go ahead, and Bob.
No, I just wanted to bring up that Bryce and JF, the chairs, like the leading LEWG and core evolution, are really trying to adjust, and so this is really a work in progress. So, but we do our best.
Yeah, and I will add my voice too. There is a lot to be said for the intensity that comes of having a conversation about C++, then falling into bed, then having another conversation about C++ over your coffee first thing in the morning.
Oh, I think we have a question at this mic, and then we'll take this mic next. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of what we do as software developers is manage complexity. So I guess kind of a two-part question. Would you say that over the years, these standards and the processes become more or less complex? And what strategies are you utilizing to simplify or reduce the complexity in the process to help with agility and things like that?
What's our equivalent of modules? Yeah, but I don't get to answer questions, so you will have to.
I think that the process has gotten more complex in the sense that there are more steps involved. But I think that that's been necessary complexity when you look at the amount of proposals that are coming in and that we're dealing with, and the scope of things that the C++ standard includes. It's like necessary complexity, I think. So the structure around the process has also improved to where, at least to me, it doesn't feel like more complicated or more like mentally taxing to keep track of things. I think we've actually done a good job of, for instance, tracking papers in GitHub is like an extra step that we didn't have before, but the fact that we now have that there makes it easier to see exactly what state is this paper in and make sure that things don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah. When we build software, the part of the complexity comes from the problems that we're trying to solve, right? Part of complexity is inherent to the problem that we're facing. C++ compared to, let's say, when I started, it was C++ 98, right? Now we're using it a lot more. There are more C++ developers than they were of C++ than they were for C++ 98. When I started the committee, we had only 3 working groups: the core language, the evolution working group, and the library working group. Now we have 4. Not only we have 4 working groups, we have the core, evolution, library evolution, and then library. But in addition to that, we have, 22, 23 study groups.
I think we're getting close to 30 subgroups total.
Oh, okay. There's some inflation going on. Yeah. But part of it is because C++ has gained tractions in a lot more domains than any of the working groups are capable of dealing with. So we have farms the problem, like outsource the problem to domain experts. Let them come up with some solution. And then the evolution working group goes, okay, does the solution fit in the general framework of the language or library? And then give feedback, they get to iterate, and then finally when they're okay with it, they move it out to the wording review groups. And so those are the concrete steps that we have taken to manage the complexity. And I think those are welcomes. Of course, now I'm incapable of telling you the exact number of study groups.
I just counted in my head, and it is 22 plus the 4 core groups, and so that's 26 total.
Okay, 26.
Active, there are 3 that have finished and are currently dormant.
I rest my case. But it is because the language has gained a lot of usage in diverse domains, and you see it in the feature sets and so forth. But we have been very busy at trying to manage the complexity, and I'm very thankful that even these days, Herb has put in this process where we used to have only chairs. Now we have chairs and assistant chairs that allow the chairs who become very busy to have help from assistant chair, and that has helped a lot. I mean, personally, I'm very thankful that I have Aaron Bowman to help with the SD12.
We talk about management, but we don't have management in the classical sense. When we are delivering a product, people say, well, we're delivering a product with a standard and such, you should use the same techniques. It's not the same. In a business, there is a management, there is some executives that set goals. People follow those goals, or they get fired, or they get promoted if they follow the rules. There's rewards, there's penalties. There are dastardly techniques being used. They don't all have to be dastardly, but it is a very different world. We are a bunch of volunteers, maybe 350 of them, and we have to create something that works without any reward except getting a feature in and improved, and no penalties for obstructionism, no mechanism for setting priorities and getting something done because it's important for something else, because we can't tell anybody to do anything in particular. So please don't take the analogy to a firm and software development and sort of commercial management too close. It is not an equivalent. It's not a very good analogy.
I think we are now at this microphone.
All right. Hi. A large part of my day job is helping people learn how to write C++ code. Almost all the questions I get are about the tools you use to work with C++ code, not about concepts or a particular kind of syntax. My question is, taking module support off the table because that's too easy and obvious, what is something that the C++ community should focus on to improve the tooling experience for the average C++ engineer?
That's an insightful question. Who'd like to go? Lisa?
I think we have a study group on that. Is that one of yours?
Could you elaborate?
I'm in that study group. I'm brainstorming.
Yeah, seriously, we do have a study group on tooling. I think it was 2016. I was pleading with her that, hey, yeah, we need to create a study group to work on tooling. Part of it is because of modules, but it is not restricted to modules. I agree that tooling is a real problem. Sometimes I find myself very surprised that C++ managed to be this successful despite the paucity of the tools. And sometimes I make jokes with my friend that C++ developers must be some kind of masochist because they manage to deliver amazing critical software despite the horrific error messages, but even if you want to take modules off the table, I'll bring them back because they are a tooling opportunity. Now we do realize that we can do things that we only dreamt of or we thought that we couldn't do. Now it is a reality. If you take GCC, Clang, or MSVC, or even EDG, it has become a reality that you can process a source file, save the result of it as a structured data, and then use it later, right? What that does, for example, is allows you to analyze a C++ program without needing a C++ frontend all the time, because you fire it once, it does its result, you save it on disk. Now you can write your Python or Ruby or JavaScript scripts to just go and get data out there and do whatever you want to do, generate bindings or anything of that. So, I'll bring modules back because they have unlocked that potential for us to move
I was
forward.
half expecting you to give that answer. So
But you got a couple of non-modules answers first. Congratulations.
You sure?
Thank you.
I'll just make one point. The group is SS22WG21, which means under ISO rules, it is a languages group. We do not have a definition of our job that includes tools, and that has held us back for a long time. The way we produce things is documents that are language definitions. They are ISO standards. We don't. A good tool is not an ISO standard, and part of the answer is that we try, but it's very hard, and our framework is not friendly to tool building. Also, we have industries with competing firms and such, again, that creates diversity, and that is sometimes good and sometimes it's a pain in the neck. But we are a language design group.
I think that in general, any sort of important system is either improving or dying. And I think that for a programming language community, it's important that it continues to be improving because the rest of the world is always improving. And we want to make sure that C++ is improving to where it keeps up with everything. So from that perspective, my answer to the question of like what tooling is most important to kind of the working programmer is tooling that allows them to continue to evolve their code base. So to me, that means things like tools that you can use to refactor your users so that you can evolve and improve your APIs. And like I think kind of the the discussion we have of, okay, modules is important because that makes the source code mean the same thing everywhere. That's an important first step along the path there. But to me, like the end goal of the tooling that I think would have the biggest effect on users is like the ability to rewrite your source code in a way that the average working programmer can write those rules that do the rewrites.
If I could add a follow-up. Bjarna was talking about the fact that the Azio group has the language as its object, but if you think about it, like everything related to package management, build system, like we have a lot of language in there that is not, I guess it's not strictly C++, but we could very well consider it to be an extension of the language itself when we talk about like how do we declare that this is a library, that a library exists, that this is how you consume the library, here's how you declare how a tooling can declare the dependencies of the library. And so there's a lot of language there. Is there an opportunity that we're not using in like kind of in understanding that all of that is also language?
I can see that one could mistake what I said as discouraging tool work. That is not the case. I'm saying that the formal framework is not helping. In my keynote this morning, one of the key things I said was you have to look at C++ as an ecosystem, even if I couldn't spell it. And I have many times pointed out that you do not write code in a language, you write it in a language in a tool chain. And we are trying to do something about that, but it is hard, and our expertise is not geared to the total ecosystem of the language. I've also talked about the necessity for education, which is another area that's absolutely necessary, but is not falls under the classical definition.
So I just want to add, and without I agree with Bjarna's point, but I will point out that it is something that crossed our minds. It's not something that is being ignored. Package manager, there's no, like for me at least, there's no concrete suggestion, but you do remember that I sent something in the mailing to address that. So I think it's, as Bjarna has said, that this is really a delicate topic because we don't want to stay behind and the easiness of use, but we also don't want to extend our borders beyond the language. So, but I really think that those things, there probably are, and I know for sure they're being considered, and it might be that it's not necessarily the place to deal with it is the Azio committee, but the people are thinking about that. And I just want to say, apart from package management, I also think that better errors are also something that we extensively considered and analysis tools. So yeah, there's quite a lot to do there.
Oh, yeah, just clarifying. The way I understood Bjarna's comment earlier was that if you look at the charter of JTC1, SC22, WG21, it was about programming language, not about development environment, which will be an appropriate place for tooling. That's the way I understood it. But I also remember a keynote that Bjarna you gave, I think was 2019 or when was the last time we had CppCon in Bellevue?
18.
18, yeah. And Bjarna was saying, oh, I want to use modules, coroutines, and by the way, I want to be able to just say, go and install this library and so that I can use it. So, and clearly package management was, on your mind and exposed as a problem that the community, not the committee, the community needed to solve. The real question is, how do we do that with the tool that we have? The tool that we have is WG21, which is just about language, right? The other thing that I think we should we should keep it in mind.
If the only tool you have is never mind.
The other thing we should keep in mind is that we have managed so far to avoid monoculture, where we have just one compiler and one true development environment. And what that has done is to help us grow different ideas that help the community to actually have different perspectives, integrate them, and make the language much better. And whatever we do in WG21, trying to solve the tooling problem, I hope we don't end up with a monoculture.
Our next question, please. Thank you for waiting.
Yeah, so this question I think I know the answer to, but I think it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts. It's a process question. So I have been involved in some other API specs that are in the industry, and there's something interesting that's distinct about defects. And what I mean by that is there an opportunity to consider things like defect reports, something that could be fast-tracked to be like an addendum to a standard? So for instance, if there's a defect in C++20 that before 23 comes out, if you know like now that there is a feature that was worded incorrectly, that everyone agrees on what the fix should be, that there still needs to be a 2+ year wait time before it's blessed enough for a compiler implementer to say, I'm going to guaranteed fix it? Or could there be a C++ 20.1 or something like that?
I think you're kind of asking two questions. One is, do we have to wait until the next normal release to fix it?
Yeah.
But more importantly, I think you're asking, can you retroactively fix it?
Yes, basically, could there be a ratification process to say, here is C++ 20.1 or something? And is that a useful idea to not have to basically cram everything through the same pipe?
We've already made 3 major fixes that are both API and ABI breaking changes from C++20, and they have been voted back as defect reports. So format has changed, ranges has changed. Those were big features, and they had some issues. So that has actually already happened. It is also the case that library and core work very hard on issues. That's a really central thing, because when issues come in, we know users are being affected. And so we resolve a lot of issues. I don't know what the numbers are this year, but it's probably over 100 this year.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the before times, we used to have this thing that I used to call technical corrigendum, where you have a standard and then you compile a bunch of defect reports and then you formally issue that as a technical corrigendum. And it has the red tape thing that you're talking about. After that, so we did that for C++98. After that, we've decided that, when we fix a bug in the spec, we're just going to label it as a DR, defect reports. And what that tells the tool vendors around is, hey, whatever you're shipping at your next opportunity, please fix it. So we do not have a synchronized point where all the tools implement the same thing. But the minute where we decide that the defect report, the mere fact that we say it's defect report is a signal to the tool vendors that they should really try hard to fix that in their tools as soon as
Yeah,
possible.
because the phrase that comes to mind the most is when I hear someone say, we implemented this feature in C++ 14 and then fixed it in 17. It's like, well, why couldn't you have fixed it in 2015? And then people implement it. Yeah.
Sometimes we do. The short answer is we no longer issue a separate document for that, but we do fix them retroactively.
Yeah. So basically, the answer to the question then, if I play it back, would be there isn't value in adding more like interim type specification addendums. It just wouldn't provide enough value to do it.
Yeah, exactly. The way you think of defect report is this is what it should have been.
Okay.
And when you think of C++ 20, for example, the way you think of it is C++ 20 plus all the future defects.
Gotcha.
So you're using something from the future.
Bjarna, and then we'll take our next question.
We are issuing international standards. And that means that we can't sort of play fast with corrections. We don't want to have to say, this is the international standard from this year with the modification from that time, and that time, plus the modification that undid the modification that we did before. We actually have to be quite a lot more careful and slow than if you are shipping a product. There are many organizations dependent on a standard. There's the major compiler vendors, which we could count to about 4, but then there's the tool vendors, and there's the library providers, and there's the people that write specialized generators for different systems. So really, the standard is being read by probably on the order of 50 organizations. Not all of them take part in the standards. They actually believe what they are told in the standard. So we have to be very careful about corrections. We try, and we do, but we have to be more careful than for product development. As I said before, management is different for an organization like
because the flip side of that is then like if there is a defect, and then saying like, well, now the defect has to last forever, and that's also a bad thing too.
Sometimes a defect has to last forever because it has been embedded in the community, in the tooling, in the libraries, in the teaching materials.
There's totally valid reasons for it. I'm not trying to say that that's not valid, but yeah, I hear you.
Yes, next question, please.
Hi. It seems like C++ is in a really good place. There haven't ever been more developers using C++. There's a bunch of really cool new features on the horizon. And we kind of brushed upon this earlier. David mentioned it. In such a good spot, you have to be cautious because you can kind of get ahead of yourself. And I'm curious what you all see as kind of the biggest existential threats for C++ in the coming 5 years, 10 years, undefined future.
Any comments? So not as far as the Gred gas giant part, which causes other problems, but any existential things? What keeps you up at night about C++ and its future evolution?
I'll try and see what I get myself in the digital.
All right. Could we go with David and then Gabi?
Yep.
There was a race condition, and I wasn't sure who was first.
So to me, I kind of see the biggest issue facing C++ is kind of what I was getting at before, that communities, products, anything is either growing or dying. And I think that C++ needs to find a way to, I guess kind of similar to what we were just talking about, how there's, we know we're going to make mistakes. That's like, that's just a fact of life, is that you don't get everything perfect the first time. And so to me, I think it's important that we develop a process that allows us to fix those mistakes and get better at doing that. I think that the focus should be on being able to fix mistakes with the smallest amount of friction as possible, as opposed to trying to get it right the first time. Like, getting right the first time is, of course, a good thing, but I don't think that you can do that all the time. So I think the main thing preventing us from being able to do that is lack of tooling, and also kind of cultural, I guess. That I think it's important that going forward, kind of your regular programmer doing their work is just kind of assumed to use tools that make it easier to fix mistakes.
Gabi?
Oh, okay. I don't know if there is one single thing that worries me, a cluster of things. The first is that I worry that in our pursuit of finding processes that help us be more efficient and serve more the community, we set up a process that make it easy to get small features in isolation into the language, and not something coherently designed, because then we get a language that is just a sum of little features with very little thought into how things work together. And I think earlier in the day, Bjarna's keynote was emphasized how key functionalities in C++ were designed to work together. And I worry a lot about little features, because every time something big come out, it will run into some opposition rather. And then we reach out to, hey, let's cut enough arms so that we have just enough to get the necessary yes votes to go through plenary. And that gets you something, but doesn't necessarily give you a good feature or a simpler language. So that worries me a lot. I do not know the fix for it. I think we have collectively continued to push for coherent directions for the language. So that's about process and culture. In terms of technical aspect, the one thing that worries me a lot is that this may be just my wrong perception, I don't know, but I worry that we do not pay enough attention to safety and security. This is not Bjarna. Bjarna's talk is always about safety and security, and in reaching out to the ideals of C++, he emphasized again this morning safety, the core guidelines. You, Bjarna, and myself, been working together. But to what degree is this taken seriously by the larger C++ community, not just the programmers, but also the tool vendors? Right. I don't know that there is one single language out there today that is able to help people solve the problems that they're solving today with C++, that doesn't run into these hard problems that we're facing. Like, it is very hard to be close to the hardware and at the same time provide 100% safety or security. Like, you're going to get very close to the hardware. You're going to do things that are kind of unusual because the hardwares keep evolving in a way that are not intuitive to mere mortals, right? So if the language wants to be relevant in that space, it has to do things that are not kind of simple to the rest. So we need tooling. To what degree the community sees that as a problem to solve? And I worry we don't have enough. A concrete example is contract, for example. Contract failed to get into C++20. We'll get one in C++26. I do not know. I would like to. I'm working very hard, but I do not know.
If I may push back on the question a little, I don't see programming going away. I think programming is going to be with us for a long time. I think programming languages are going to be with us for a long time. The thing that's going to push C++ off the map is a better language coming along. One that is so good that people leave C++ for that language. And I look forward to that language. That'll be great. Now, I do worry that the people who design that language might not learn from all of our mistakes. I would really love it if they would take our mistakes and do better.
I'm gonna urge you to read P2000, the directions document, where we highlighted some of the basic principles on which C++ has survived for the better part of the last 20, 30, 40 years. And I think if we deviate from some of those principles, that's when we think C++ can be endangered. There are many domains and many parts and many other languages, and we don't strive to catch every one of their features, and we can't. The key thing I think we always are trying to do is try to make C++ more expressive, higher and higher abstraction, but stay as close to the metal as possible. And that's a formula that has seemed to work over the last 40, 50 years. We're not trying to be any specialized language. There are plenty of those that can do a great job, I guess. Sometimes the committee can take it in different directions, and I think part of the things that we're trying to do is try to stay with those principles. I mean, the committee is getting big and much bigger, and that's a great thing. I think it's part of the good work that some of the people on stage are doing, making it much more popularized. But as with any large organism, it has a tendency to sometimes eat itself, I think. So I don't know. This is something that we as a group are trying to deal with by having, who was it that I was asking about complexity over here? Better communications. The groups are now, the communication meshes are much tighter now. And that's the only way we can survive. And even, long-time members, I forget to tell people things, and I'm embarrassed by it sometimes.
You used the phrase existential threat. And since C++ has been declared dead, at least once every year since before it was named C++, I'm not losing too much sleep over that. There are things that I worry about. They have mostly to do with fragmentation of the community. You can look at rules, tools, ways of using it, ways of using features. And that's where I worry the most. And that people are trying to deal with these problems. We have people dealing with education, rules, tools, language features, etc. And I think probably the greatest danger here is either that we didn't evolve or that we evolved so fast that we made major mistakes. And out of those two, I worry about enthusiasm. I worry about people getting so enthusiastic about something that the language grows in a fashionable way, or we start the committee starts banning backward compatible things or breaking things in the enthusiasm for the new. That I worry about, but I am hopeful that the committee and the community has enough common sense not to move too fast.
Thank you.
I would love to just add. So I really agree with what Lisa have said. I don't think there's dangers in the sense of I don't think we're trying to, it's not a war. No one's winning. So I really think that the target of the people in this room and other people in Azio is basically just to provide a tool that is good, that is useful, that is easy to learn as well. So I think we do it well with, I think modern C++ is doing to old C++ what C++ have done to C. So I really think we're progressing there. And personally, I believe in this project. That's why I spend a lot of time on it. I think it's I think we're in a good direction. And the second thing is, I think that the important thing is that we make sure that our progress is good, and I think we're also improving on that. So,
thank you. We have time for one more short question, or at least a short answer. Go ahead.
Earlier you mentioned that C++ is a ISO standard. What are the pros and what are the cons of it being an ISO standard?
Yeah, that's short. Do we have the room until midnight? I think so. But please go ahead. It's a good question. We don't mind going a few minutes over. Would C++ be in a better place if we weren't an ISO standard? What are the pros and cons? Bjarna, you were an instigator for getting us all here, so...
I was the original victim. The representatives from IBM, HP, and Sun came and explained to me that I really, really wanted to help them start an ANSI-standard group, and they twisted my arm mercilessly for an hour, and I agreed that we really, really wanted that. So I don't think there was a choice. It was going to happen. Now, I think on average for the last 20-some years, it has been a benefit to the community. In particular, having an ISO committee allows people from competing organizations to collaborate on important things for their organizations. We have been doing lots of things that couldn't have been done without the committee. I think modules is actually a very good example. And if we could do that for tools too, that would be even better. But it is a bureaucracy, it is a pain in the neck, it is a organization without a funding organization, without a management structure. It is very democratic. People can come in and 8 months after they can start voting with a voting strength equal to the biggest corporations on earth. And there's no requirement of education, experience, or common sense. And sometimes that shows, and the committee has a big challenge in making sure that the decisions are actually sane and that we are actually working as friends and trusting each other, and that people that come in maybe a bit naive actually learn, and so it becomes constructive. So we are mutating within the framework of WD 1021. We don't have a choice, but we are managing.
That's a very nice summary. Any closing notes?
Would you like to go? Okay. It's a very insightful question because not many people realize that C++ doesn't have to be an ISO language. I myself took many years before I realized that that was the case. And yes, the thing is that ISO comes with a big framework. And as long as that framework doesn't get in the way, it's a helpful thing to have. Everybody moves in lockstep and holding our hands together to take a step forward, which means it takes a little longer for sometimes things to get done. I've been involved in many different kinds of organizations, outside as well too. And if you're outside of ISO, you could move a little faster, maybe. You could make a little bit more money. You could be richer. We could be having conferences in much nicer venues than somebody's university. But we make do with what we have, what we can, with the money that we have, which is very little, or whatever is contributed by somebody, okay? If you get down to a language that's controlled by one company, even faster, but nobody follows that, and we've seen that. So these trade-offs are constantly happening. And within our organization itself, I never realized that we could have been out of ISO too until we there was a thing that happened a couple of years ago. We said, well, these rules, I'm not sure we like that. And we thought, well, there's an option. And then that's when we thought that it is possible, but by and large, these are the things that I see are the differences.
Yeah. The first time I actually attended a in-person talk by Bjarna was in France, in Sophia Antipolis, and he described the committee as the process as democratic and bureaucratic. And to this day, I believe that is its strength and its weakness. I've done enough TSs to testify for the weaknesses. But at the same time, because it is a nice organization, it allows competing companies to get together, define something for the community without falling under the breaking any laws, antitrust laws, and that kind of stuff. And I really wouldn't want to spend at least half of my lifetime so far on a language that is owned by one single corporation. What happens when they go out of business or they get acquired by someone else who owns other entities that is after more money than advancing the well-being of the community?
Well, thank you. Thank you all. That was a great final question. Thank you all to the panelists, not just for your many years of service in WG21, many years, as long as it's existed, but also your insightful questions on what it's like today. And I'm sure that people appreciated hearing, maybe almost as much as we enjoy talking about, man, how hasn't the pandemic been hard? The effect on the standardization is the least important part, but it's an important part of our work lives. And so that's something that we've been glad to share. Thank you for your insights. Shall we give them a hand? Thank you very much for your participation.